So, Sarah, we've seen this anonymous editorial written from allegedly inside senior levels of the administration, the Woodward book that came out saying that senior staff have called President Trump an idiot. All of these stories coming out, allegations that documents are taken off his desk so he doesn't sign them. What does all of this say to you about the president?
Well, these allegations and these storylines have been going on since the president took office. So this isn't the first round of this type of headline coming out of the White House. You know, look, it's a very unconventional president. He has a very different way of doing things. He has a very different staff who have a very different code than I think many of the other White Houses that we've all come accustomed to watching, working in, myself working in, others covering. And so it's really, you know, it's hard to label it because there's really no precedent for it.
Do you think he's actually in charge based on the stories we're hearing about senior officials denying direct orders and just not telling them?
Yeah, I mean, look, he is in charge because he has the last word. Now, does that mean that there aren't others who are working for him who have chosen not to share information with him and for whatever their own purposes are? But at the end of the day, he will make the decision, including the decision about who works there. You know, he ultimately has the last word. So by definition, he's in charge. I worked for a president that people said wasn't in charge, that Dick Cheney was in charge. People made this same claim about Ronald Reagan. He was never in charge. His staff withheld information about him. So I don't, you know, there's plenty to criticize about Donald Trump, a lot, but, you know, to suggest he's not in charge, I don't think is accurate.
Sarah, you know, we have these anonymous editorials being published, the Woodward book. All these stories seem to be coming from sources around Donald Trump in his own White House. You worked in the White House. What does that tell you about how this White House is functioning?
Well, it doesn't function. I mean, for starters, I think the staff here, you know, they constantly look out for, number one, and what does it mean for them relative to their role in this White House. And that wasn't something we saw in the Bush White House. I don't think the Obama team were big leakers. This White House feels like they're, you know, to me, seems like they're in a constant state of trying to protect each other relative, you know, to what somebody else might be saying. And it just creates a very unhealthy governing dynamic. And it's a disservice to President Trump, frankly, and it's a disservice to the American people. However, I would say ultimately Donald Trump is responsible because he allows it to continue. He himself seems to thrive on it, seems to think that this is, you know, part of a show that in which he's the main actor and these folks are all supporting characters and this is sort of entertaining. And, you know, that's unfortunate, but it is the way things have been conducted since he's been in office.
So having worked in a Republican White House and heard these kinds of stories before, in the case of Donald Trump, do you think they're true?
Well, look, I think, you know, Donald Trump is in many ways very hard to put parameters around his style because he seems to revel in the chaos. He seems to stoke it. He seems to like it. He seems to think a lot of the presidency is a sideshow. He doesn't have the seriousness that one would expect from a White House figure about the use of Twitter, about the use of the Justice Department, about the use of, you know, some of his language about opposition, for example. So, you know, again, like, it's not a style that many Republicans endorse, frankly, but it's the style he has, and it's the style that we are now, you know, obliged to follow because he is, in fact, you know, the president.
I'm curious about that. Why do you think Republicans continue to publicly defend him when privately they're expressing these kinds of reservations?
I think it's very easy to explain that because it's very political. I mean, at the end of the day, the president has a very strong base. You know, President Trump can say something outlandish, foolish. We could call it stupid, but he has a base of people that believe him. And even if he says something dumb, they actually believe he didn't say it, that somebody made it up. So if you're a Republican official, you know, in Congress, and you have a big piece of that base in your district, you know, what's happening is they may have private reservations about the president, but they're saying, I don't need the Donald Trump base upset at me. These people are my base too. And so they just make the political calculation not to say it publicly. There is a breaking point, of course. What that is, when that happens, I'm not sure, but we certainly haven't seen it yet.
Are you concerned at some point it becomes undemocratic? Because he is the elected president, as you pointed out, and you have people saying they're trying to contain him. Where does that cross the line between good advice and people who weren't elected running the country?
That's right. And I mean, the anonymous New York Times editorial is inappropriate. That person or people, if there's multiple involved, those people should step forward, they should resign. It is not their place. They don't have a right to be there. He is the elected president. You know, I didn't happen to agree with him on most approaches he takes in public policy, but he won the election, he won it fairly, and he has a right to govern. And the American public has the right to choose to re-elect him or kick him out of office after these midterms in the 2020 election.
Now, the Canadian government is down here trying to negotiate a new NAFTA deal. They haven't had success in cutting a deal so far. What advice do you have for countries like Canada who are trying to negotiate with the Trump administration?
I think sometimes, you know, again, you have to sort of approach this like none of the old norms apply. And in the old days of trade negotiations, the lawyers and the trade experts would spend months sort of haggling over details, and there would be a signing ceremony. This is a very different process, and I think that Canadians, you know, might benefit from taking, you know, a piece of some other countries' playbooks who go out and, you know, say something positive about Trump and his approach. There's a little psychology, I think, that's involved when you're dealing with this president. You know, how do you have a public show with him where he feels like he got a win? And I haven't seen Canadians do that yet. Your Prime Minister may not be willing to do that, but certainly other countries who've done that have seemed to have more success in dealing with him.
Great, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.